Beane starts off the session fishing for answers, discussing the work he carried out tracking an invasive species of carp in South Louisiana. Logan's project combines his love for fishing and the outdoors with his interest in ecology and took him to some of the best boat launches in Louisiana. Let's hear it for Logan.
Alright, so as Yassine said, I did my summer research on carp and their abundance in coastal Louisiana. Specifically, if we can determine habitat characteristics that will help us predict where they are. I have been very outdoorsy and a fisherman since I was very young. It's given me the opportunity to travel all over the world and experience many different ecosystems. For example, that's a snook I caught in Mexico 2 years ago. That's a permit in Belize when I was like 11. And this is a cobietta redfish here in our very own Gulf of Mexico. But these are just a few of my fishing experiences, and because of this love for fishing and the desire to protect all of our species, I went into a field to try to stop these invasive carp that are ruining our ecosystems. So a little bit about my experience before I started. I spent 3 days on a boat traveling southern Louisiana. We traversed almost 400 miles from almost all the way west of Lake Charles to back to Morgan City. And I got to see lots of horrible boat ramps, like Yassine said. It was a struggle. But there are 4 species of invasive carp here in Louisiana: the silver carp, the black carp, the big head carp, and the grass carp. And my research focused mainly on the silver carp in the top right, which is the most abundant and arguably the worst for the ecosystems. And they were all introduced into these aquaculture ponds in Arkansas in 1973. And aquaculture ponds are for growing aquatic things, whether that be mussels or seaweed or anything like that. And these fish are very good at eating bacteria. They're filter feeders, so they can consume a lot of it. And they keep the water clean in optimal growing conditions. But naturally, these ponds flooded and they escaped into the Mississippi and were able to travel all over the country using the Mississippi and all of its tributaries. And just to give you an idea of how fast and far these fish can spread, we had 2 fish that we tracked in our Louisiana arrays that came down from Kentucky and Missouri and made the journey in a matter of weeks. So they can cover hundreds of miles very quickly. But I really wanted to do this because these carp are devastating to our native species. They eat the bacteria that produce the oxygen that everything else in the water needs to live. And they absorb so much nutrients because they come in such massive numbers that it's almost impossible for the native species to rival against these carp. And once they're fully grown, they're like 4 or 5 feet long, so they have no natural predators. So it's really hard to get them out of the ecosystem once they're already in. So I wanted to do everything I could to help prevent it before it's too late. We tracked these fish using what's called acoustic telemetry. So that little tag was surgically implanted into the carp, and it sent out a ping every couple seconds. And if the carp got close enough to the receiver would detect it. And depending on where the receiver was, if it was out in an open bay, it could be up to half a mile. Whereas if it's in a confined river, it could be just a couple hundred meters. But the downloading process to get the data off of those receivers was quite simple because they were all Bluetooth devices. So that little yellow thing is our key. You put that in and it dumps the data directly onto the receiver, or it dumps the data directly onto our computer and it gives us a graph that looks like this. So each row here is an individual fish, and the horizontal axis shows us time, so we can kind of get a gauge of how long each fish was around each receiver, which can help us like create ideas and hypotheses on why those fish are there and what's keeping them there. But other than that, I subdivided these receivers into categories, being bay, channel, river, and intercoastal. And then from there, I used a satellite map to measure the width of each body of water. And then while we were out downloading the receivers, I measured the depth at each body of water. And we used all of these things as different variables to help us determine where the carp preferred to be. So we had 200 fish tagged in our array, but we detected more fish than that because, as I said, these fish can come from anywhere. And of our 29 receivers out, I think my study incorporated 26 of them. So we covered almost all of coastal Louisiana. And we were able to compile this graph that has all of the categories, or all of the receivers divided by category. And as you can tell, the rivers have an overwhelming number of fish. So we were able to conclude that these carp wanted to be in rivers, and from our other variables, we were able to determine that they wanted a steep drop from shallow to deep. So our final conclusion was that these fish were looking for a narrow river with a steep drop from shallow to deep that had some flowing water. It was their preference. And obviously my research is just the first step into containing and controlling these fish. It would be helpful if we knew their migration routes or where they spawn so we could target these areas because they come in such massive numbers that it's really hard to control them once they're already there. So we have to do everything we can to stop them from getting there. And we need to protect whatever's left of the native species we have.